of the Woodland Realm. 3 times the now foodless company would find this group of elves feasting in the forest. Yet each time the dwarves approached, they would put out their fires and plunge the company into darkness. This trickery causes the dwarves to leave the path, something they had been warned not to do should they wish to successfully complete the journey. Lost and separated, Bilbo and the dwarves would all be attacked by the vile creatures of Shelob's brood, the spiders of Mirkwood. In his cleverness, Bilbo is able to lure the spiders away and rescue the dwarves. Together, the company fends off the spiders when they return. However, they discover Thorin is not among them, having been captured by the elves. Soon afterward, the remaining dwarves are also captured and brought to Thranduil's halls in the north of Mirkwood. Bilbo follows using his magic ring, leaving this dark area of Mirkwood with a new purpose and a new name for his sword, Sting. The dwarves are brought before Thranduil, who questions them about their doings, where they are from, and where they are going. The dwarves are uncooperative. "What have we done, O king?" said Balin, who was the eldest left. "Is it a crime to be lost in the forest? To be hungry and thirsty? To be trapped by spiders? Are the spiders your tame beasts or your pets, if killing them makes you angry?" Such a question, of course, made the king angrier than ever, and he answered, "It is a crime to wander in my realm without leave. Do you forget that you were in my kingdom, using the road that my people made? Did you not 3 times pursue and trouble my people in the forest, and rouse the spiders with your riot and clamor? After all the disturbance you have made, I have the right to know what brings you here, and if you will not tell me now, I will keep you all in prison until you have learned sense and manners." Over the coming weeks, Bilbo would sneak around the Elven King's halls, always in hiding and wearing his ring. On occasion, he would sneak out when the Wood Elves, sometimes with Thranduil at the lead, would go out on a hunt or other business. However, it was risky, as he would nearly be caught in the doors as they shut. Not to mention, once shut, the doors were sealed with magic. For nearly a month, Bilbo would sneak his way throughout the elven dwelling, eventually finding the cells of all the dwarves, including Thorin. Bilbo then discovers a new way out of Thranduil's halls and orchestrates their grand escape via empty wine barrels. After the prison break, Thranduil receives word from the elves who transported barrels upstream, and he is able to deduce the dwarves' mission. In response, Thranduil says to himself, "Very well, we'll see. No treasure will come back through Mirkwood without my having something to say in the matter. But I expect they will all come to a bad end, and serve them right." The company would not come to a bad end. Instead, Thranduil learns of Smaug's demise. Being well aware of the treasure hoard within the mountain, but unaware of the dwarves' survival, Thranduil sets out to claim a share of the treasure. After giving aid to the men of Laketown, Thranduil and Bard the Bowman lead their forces to Erebor, where they realize the dwarves had indeed survived. As we've covered in previous videos, there is strife between the men and elves and dwarves. Their differences are set aside with the arrival of an orc army under Balg, and the battle of 5 armies ensues. Though victorious, we are told many wood elves were slain in the conflict. It seems they would be avenged, as many of the surviving orcs flee into the Great Forest, where they are either slain by elves or drawn in to die in the trackless dark of Mirkwood. While Thranduil would lay the elven blade Orcrist upon Thorin's tomb, he would take back to the Woodland Realm the necklace of Girion, a great piece of jewelry adorned with emeralds, a gift from Bard. With the necromancer driven from Dol Guldur, Mirkwood has a brief respite. But like all Middle-earth, it would feel the effects as the War of the Ring draws near. Just 2 years after Bilbo's adventure, Gollum would travel through Mirkwood searching for this supposed thief. While While he is not captured by the elves, his presence would haunt the woodmen, who whispered of a ghost that drank blood and would creep into windows to find cradles. Then, in 2951, just 10 years after he was driven from Dol Guldur, Sauron would send Khamûl the Easterling, second greatest of the Nazgûl, along with 2 other ringwraiths to reoccupy the old fortress. For decades, they would operate in the south as the elves remained in the north, seemingly at a stalemate as the shadow grows in Middle-earth. On March 21st, 3018, Thranduil would receive a visitor and a captive. Aragorn arrives having traveled 900 miles from the Dead Marshes, with Gollum in tow. Along the way, he had been aided by the Beornings, the men of Mirkwood who had followed Beorn, and by this later time, his son, Grimbeorn. 2 days after Aragorn's arrival, Gandalf comes to Mirkwood and begins to interrogate Gollum for information about his ring and his actions. After a week in the Elven realm, Gandalf would leave, heading back to the Shire in order to send Frodo on his quest. Over the coming months, Thranduil's people would be charged with keeping Gollum prisoner. During his captivity, they would occasionally take him outside the Elven King's halls and allow him to climb trees. One day, 3 months after Gollum's arrival, orcs attack the Wood Elves, allowing Gollum to escape. Realizing others must be informed, Thranduil sends his son Legolas to Rivendell with the message. There he would take part in the Council of Elrond and join the Fellowship of the Ring. As this prince of the Woodland Realm embarks on the Great Quest, his homeland would come under a renewed threat from Dol Guldur. Our first clue actually comes from Frodo Baggins. When the Fellowship comes to Amon Hen, and Frodo sits upon the seat of seeing, he is able to see far across Middle-earth, and we are told, under the boughs of Mirkwood there was deadly strife of elves and men and fell beasts. The land of the Beornings was aflame, a cloud was over Moria, smoke rose on the borders of Lorien. While this is the only mention of such a conflict on February 26, 3019, there would be plenty more in the days to come. In 3 separate attacks on March 11th, 15th, and 22nd, orcs from Dol Guldur would cross the river Anduin and attack the realm of Lorien. Each time they are repelled by the elven warriors and the power of Galadriel and her ring. Coinciding with the second of these attacks is an attack on Thranduil's realm, also originating from Dol Guldur. This battle under the trees of Mirkwood would result in great fire damage to the forest. Yet in the end, Thranduil and his people would prove victorious. 6 days after the attack on the Woodland Realm, and 3 days after Sauron's downfall, Galadriel and Celeborn would launch an attack upon Dol Guldur. The Galathrim are successful, and this dark fortress, the greatest remnant of Sauron and Mirkwood, is thrown down by Galadriel's hand. 8 days later, on April 6, 3019, Thranduil and Celeborn would meet in the middle of Mirkwood. There they divide the Great Forest, now free of Sauron's influence. Celeborn takes the southern portion, making it East Lorien. Thranduil takes the portion north of the Emenduir. As for the central portion, it is given to the Beornings and Woodmen, who had for so long lived in friendship with them, and also fought the forces of evil. To the forest as a whole, they would give a new name, reminiscent of its old one, Erin Las Galan, meaning Wood of Green Leaves. 20 years into the Fourth Age, Legolas would lead a group of elves out of his father's kingdom. By the leave of King Aragorn, they would set up a dwelling in the lands of Ithilien, making it the fairest country in all the Westlands. These elves were said to have lived in Ithilien for the next 100 years, and alongside dwarves led by Gimli, they would help restore Minas Tirith. As for Thranduil, we are told nothing of this elven king after his meeting with Celeborn. While some may envision him eventually taking one of the last ships into the west, it's also possible that he would live on in the Greenwood, ruling the Sylvan elves of the forest in his underground halls of the Woodland Realm until the utmost fading of their kind.
We dare not stray from our path.
As always, I want to say a huge thank you to all my Patreon and YouTube supporters who make this channel possible. Tom DeBombadil 19, Lissamy the Cinda, Rabbi Rob Thomas, Charles Leisure, CCGC Red Team, Joe Tepper, The Mighty Mim, Andrew Carlisle, Swirled Traveler, Matthew Jeffrey, Viking Lord, Alvin Einbert, Jeremy Daniel Derby, Madame Director, Leo Vittori, Sky Carcass, Slide Belts, Dane Ragnarsson, Berto Berg, Graham Darracott, The Dark Haired One, Wyland, Z and N, Evely, Micah Wu, and Debbie. If you enjoyed the artwork in this video, check out the artists in the description to purchase prints of their great work for yourself. Next time, on Nerd of the Rings.
At a phase jump inhibitor. We maintain our vigil. If that is our will.
3 rings for the elven kings under the sky. 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone. 9 for mortal men doomed to die. 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne, in the land of Mordor, where the shadows lie. 1 ring to rule them all, 1 ring to find them, 1 ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them, in the land of Mordor, where the shadows lie. Today on Nerd of the Rings, we're taking a compiled look at the history of every ring of power. We begin our journey by looking at the greatest of rings for the Free Peoples, and those Sauron coveted most after their creation, the 3 Elven Rings. Around 1200 of the Second Age, Sauron, in his fair form of Annatar, begins working to corrupt the elves. He gains a foothold in Eregion, infiltrating the realm and working with the Gwaith y Myrdain, a brotherhood of great elven craftsmen, led by their lord Celebrimbor, the greatest elven smith since his grandfather Feanor. These Noldorian smiths had a desire to bring the joys of Valinor to Middle-earth, making them particularly susceptible to Sauron's deception. He teaches them the manner of creating the Rings of Power, with the promise that they would slow the decay of the world, preserving the things they cared for, and enhancing their power. Sometime in the next 300 years, the elves forge lesser rings, what Gandalf calls mere essays in the craft. These rings were plain and had no jewels, similar in appearance to the One Ring at a glance, partially explaining why it was assumed for many years that Bilbo's was one of these lesser rings. Finally, in 1500, the Gwaith y Myrdain began forging the Great Rings of Power. Together with Sauron's help, they forged 16 Great Rings, which we'll cover in videos of their own. Sauron leaves Eregion, heading to Mordor to forge his greatest of rings. During this time, Celebrimbor and his elves forged 3 rings of their own, the Elven Rings of Power. Having been created without Sauron's help, these 3 rings are free from his corrupting influence. The 3 rings are named after the 3 elements of water, fire, and air. Nenya, the Ring of Water, is made of mithril with a stone of adamant, and is considered the chief of the 3. Narya, the Ring of Fire, has a ruby setting, and Vilya, the Ring of Air, is made of gold with a stone of sapphire. While Nenya is the chief ring, Tolkien says Vilya is the mightiest of the 3. It just so happens that the 3 elven rings, important objects of the Second and Third Ages, have a connection to the Silmarils, incredibly important objects from the First Age. The elements of the rings, water, fire, and air, correspond with the fates of the 3 Silmarils. One is cast by Maglor into the sea at the end of the First Age. One Maedhros took with him as he cast himself into a fiery chasm around the same time. And the third is worn upon the brow of Eärendil, and is in the sky as a great star. In 1600 of the Second Age, Sauron creates the One Ring. and putting it on, his treachery is revealed to the elves, who take off their rings. Celebrimbor, perceiving Sauron's mind, sends the 3 rings to other great elves to keep them from falling into Sauron's hands. He sends the chief of the 3 to Galadriel, who is now living in Lothlorien. She advises him to send the other 2 to Lindon, further away from Sauron. They are sent to the High King Gil-galad, who takes Vilya himself while giving Narya to Círdan the Shipwright. By 1697, Sauron has laid waste to Eregion and sacked its capital of Ost-in-Edil. He seizes control of the 16 Rings of Power, but cannot find the 3. Regarding the 3 rings, Tolkien states, "Of all the elven rings, Sauron most desired to possess them, for those who had them in their keeping could ward off the decays of time and postpone the weariness of the world." In his deep desire to obtain the 3, Sauron tortures Celebrimbor to determine their hiding place. Celebrimbor, however, would reveal nothing to the Dark Lord and is put to death. While Círdan and Galadriel would continue to possess their rings, Gil-galad would pass his on to Elrond prior to the War of the Last Alliance. In this war, Gil-galad would fall alongside Elendil as they defeat Sauron. While the loss of the High King is a tremendous blow to the elves, with Sauron defeated and his ring taken by Isildur, they are free to once again use their 3 rings of power. Galadriel, with Nenya, would make Lothlorien into a great and beautiful realm, hearkening back to the days of old. Meanwhile, Elrond would return to Rivendell, which would be a safe haven for thousands of years. Círdan remains in Lindon, specifically the Grey Havens, where he would possess the Ring of Fire for the next 1,000 years. In that year of 1000 of the Third Age, emissaries of the Valar would arrive in Middle-earth in order to help the men and elves combat the resurgent threat of Sauron. As Círdan meets Saruman the White, Radagast the Brown, and Gandalf the Grey, he gives his Ring of Power not to the leader Saruman, but to Gandalf, perceiving that the wizard would have great use for such a ring in his journeys and duties. "Take this ring, master, for your labors will be heavy, but it will support you in the weariness that you have taken upon yourself. For this is the Ring of Fire, and with it you may rekindle hearts in a world that grows chill." This statement from Círdan alludes to a unique ability of this ring. Narya, now carried by Gandalf, is said to have the power to inspire others to resist tyranny, something we see Gandalf do quite often. Perhaps no greater a situation than in the siege of Minas Tirith. Nenya, Galadriel's ring, as it is said of all elven rings, enables her to preserve Lorien from the decay of time. However, its power seems to go beyond that. With Nenya, Galadriel is able to make Lorien into a great and beautiful realm that harkens back to the great realms of old in Valinor. We even hear of this ring being helpful in protecting Lorien from later attacks by orcs. For Lorien would be attacked from Dol Guldur while war was marching upon Minas Tirith, with Galadriel expelling the orcs each time. As for Vilya, we are never directly told of a specific power, aside from the general ability of preservation, allowing Rivendell to become a great refuge of its own. Knowing that it is considered the greatest of the 3, there are many great theories on what this could have meant. Perhaps it was similar to Galadriel's, allowing Elrond to keep Rivendell safe from would-be attackers, perhaps evidenced at the ford of Bruinen. Another great possibility is that it enhanced its wearer's natural gifts of wisdom and healing, perhaps aiding Elrond in treating the wounds Frodo receives from the cursed blade of the Witch King. While the 3 rings were not connected to the one in the same way as, say, the 9, which enabled Sauron to enslave men into ring wraiths, their powers were still connected, since these rings were still made using the techniques the elves had received from Sauron. They could not be wholly separate from the ruling ring. Thus, when the One Ring is destroyed and Sauron is finally defeated, the power of the three rings begins to fade. Their power gone, the rings are nothing more than mere relics of a bygone age. No longer having the ability to preserve the lore and beauty of their realms, Elrond and Galadriel go with Gandalf to the Grey Havens. The three rings and their bearers would take the White Ship and sail into the west, ending the Third Age and ushering in the Fourth. As the dominion of men begins, the time of the elves and their rings comes to a close. But what of the 16, which Sauron stole from Eregion? Next, we turn our attention to the 7, with my video on the Dwarven Rings. By 1600 of the Second Age, Sauron and the Gwaith y Myrdain have created 16 great rings of power, the 7 and the 9. As mentioned in my previous video on the Elven Rings, Celebrimbor would keep the 16 in Eregion until his realm falls to Sauron in 1697. After capturing and torturing Celebrimbor, Sauron claims the Rings of Power for his own use. Now, there is some discrepancy on how many of these rings were still around at the time of the fall of Eregion. In some accounts, like in the Silmarillion, it implies that when Sauron destroys Eregion, he claims 16 rings. However, in the appendix of The Lord of the Rings, we find out that the 3 elven rings were not the only ones Celebrimbor gave away. In this account, we are told that Celebrimbor gives one of these rings to his friend King Durin III of Khazad-dûm. This would mean that the dwarven ring we know the most about was never actually given by Sauron. But we'll get back to that particular ring in a minute. Sometime after the fall of Eregion, Sauron gives the 9 rings to men, and the remaining rings to the dwarves. It is believed that the 7 dwarf lords who possessed the rings were the 7 kings of the 7 clans. The Broadbeams, Firebeards, Ironfists, Stiffbeards, Blacklocks, Stonefoots, and Longbeards. It's possible that Sauron intended these rings to have a similar effect as the 9 would have on men, turning them into wraith slaves in servitude to the Dark Lord. However, the rings would not have this effect on the dwarves. It would not even turn their wearers invisible. Instead, these rings would simply amplify the wearer's natural skills. The dwarves used their rings to amass wealth, bringing about the 7 great treasure hoards. However, as they amass wealth, the rings also feed their greed and wrath, which would indirectly be beneficial to Sauron. Being one of the more secretive races, we actually don't know where the 7 hordes of the dwarves were. However, we can guess that some may have coincided with the areas where the great dwarf fathers awoke in the earliest days of the world. We also know of a couple specific instances of great dwarf hordes that are overtaken by dragons. The earliest is Scatha the Worm, who plunders a great dwarf treasure in the Grey Mountains. This would be the great hazard of the dwarven hordes. In fact, we are told that no less than 4 of the dwarven rings of power are either swallowed or destroyed by dragons. 2 others were recovered by Sauron. The most famous and final surviving ring was the very same that was given to Durin III of Khazad-dûm. It would be passed down the line of the kings of Durin's folk until it comes to Thror, the grandfather of Thorin Oakenshield, who would recolonize the realm of Erebor. This comes after they are driven from the Grey Mountains by the dragons of the north. With his ring and the Arkenstone, Thror leads his people to Erebor, and the realm to great prosperity. As seen time after time in the history of the dwarves and their rings of power, the great treasure hoard of Erebor attracts the attention of a dragon. Not just any dragon, but the greatest of all the Third Age, Smaug. After Smaug takes control of the mountain, Thror, with his ring and his people, goes into exile. As they settle in the lands of Dunland, Thror's ring would pass to Thorin's father, Thrain. After coming to settle in the Blue Mountains, Thrain would embark on a journey in an attempt to reclaim Erebor in 2841. 4 years later, he would be separated from his company and captured by the servants of Sauron. They take the king to Dol Guldur, where Sauron tortures him and reclaims the Ring of Thror, the final of the 7 rings taken from Dwarven control. Though we do know that Sauron's messenger sent to Erebor offered King Dain these 3 rings and the realm of Khazad-dûm in exchange for the return of Sauron's ring, supposedly stolen by the thief Bilbo Baggins. After this, the Dwarven rings would fall out of the history of Middle-earth and are lost forever in mystery. Finally, after the Dark Lord's downfall, we see great realms of the dwarves continue into the 4th Age, unburdened by the presence of a Ring of Power. In Erebor, Dain's son, Thorin Stonehelm, would rule as king under the mountain. Meanwhile, Gimli, son of Glóin, would lead a group of dwarves from their home to found the realm of Aglarond in the glittering caves behind Helm's Deep. As Galadriel predicted, gold would flow through Gimli's hands, yet over him, unlike many kings before, gold would have no dominion. Now we turn to the final set of rings distributed by Sauron, 9 for mortal men doomed to die. The 9 rings share the same origin as the 7 of the dwarves. They were made in Eregion by the Gwaith y Myrdain, the elven smiths under their lord Celebrimbor. Unlike the later 3 rings of the elves, the 9 are made with Sauron's help, binding them even more to his one ring. Despite being in a vault in Eregion as Sauron creates the One Ring around 1600 of the Second Age, the 9 would fall into the Dark Lord's hands. In 1697, when Sauron sacks the realm and kills Celebrimbor, he claims the 9 rings, along with those that would go to the dwarves. Sometime in the next 500 years, presumably after 1701 when he is driven out of Eriador, Sauron would give these 9 rings to great men in Middle-earth, tempted by his power. We know that 3 of the 9 men were lords of Númenor. For one other, we are given an actual name, Khamûl, the Easterling. Where the other 5 came from, we can only guess. We are told the Rings of Power gave their wearers powerful magical abilities, and the ability to influence people's will. For these men, it gave to them very long life, and in their day they would become mighty kings, sorcerers, and warriors. However, the cost of trusting Sauron would come due. Over time, they begin to see things of the unseen, the world where both good and evil spiritual beings existed, whether they appeared in the physical world or not. Their bodily forms fade until they become wraiths entirely, living within the unseen world, slaves under the domination of Sauron's One Ring. In 2251 of the Second Age, as Númenor becomes divided between 2 opposing factions, these 9 men first appear in Middle-earth as the Nazgûl, the black speech word for ring wraiths. While we know the Nazgûl would first appear in 2251, we know not where or what they did. In fact, their deeds during the Dark Years, Sauron's time in Númenor, and the War of the Last Alliance are entirely unknown. What we do know is that when Sauron is defeated in 3441 by the Last Alliance, the 9 fade into the shadows for over 1,000 years. Now I go more in depth into the ring wraiths and their actions in 2 previous videos, so we'll primarily stick to the actions involving their rings here. But check out those videos if you're interested in their travels and the Angmar Wars of the Witch King. Speaking of Angmar, it is around 1300 of the Third Age when Sauron's presence in Dol Guldur brings about evil things in the Misty Mountains. It is also during this time that the Nazgûl reappear in Middle-earth, and their leader gathers evil men to him in the north, founding the Witch Kingdom of Angmar, thus giving the Lord of the Nazgûl his well-known name. It's entirely possible that the Witch King's Ring of Power aided him in drawing followers to his realm in order to attack and destroy the realm of Arnor. But this brings up another common debate regarding the 9 rings of power. Who was it that actually possessed them? The wraiths themselves, or Sauron? There seem to be conflicting accounts when it comes to the possession of the 9. In the chapter The Council of Elrond in the Fellowship of the Ring, Gandalf, when talking of the rings of power, says, "The 9 the Nazgul keep," seeming to imply that the ring wraiths still possess their rings. However, in other places, we are led to believe that Sauron had taken the 9 rings himself, possibly to augment his own power in his attempted return in the later Third Age. We know that Frodo does not see any rings on the Nazgul at Weathertop, and it's entirely logical that the rings would still have tremendous effect over the 9, even when not in their possession. As we see with Gollum, a ring of power can have a great hold over people, despite them not possessing it, and it is likely that the wraiths possessed their rings for well over 4 times as long as Gollum possessed the one. It was well over 2,200 years, and possibly over 4,000, compared to Gollum's 500. We know that the wraiths certainly would not have needed their rings in order to be invisible. It is only due to their wearing of silver hauberks and black cloaks that they are visible to those in the seen world. They shed these during the attack on Osgiliath, which masks their crossing of the river Anduin in order to search for the One Ring. Surrounding the Nazgul is also an aura of terror, as we hear many times of the effect that they have on those around them, even those that cannot see them. As Tolkien once wrote in a letter, they have no great physical power against the fearless, but what they have, and the fear that they inspire, is enormously increased in darkness. Another unique weapon given to the ring wraiths is called the Black Breath. It is a foul and poisonous effect that people would fall under who had close contact with one of the Nazgul. In the books, we see this occur to Merry twice, once in Bree, and also alongside Éowyn in their battle with the Witch King. Faramir would also fall under the Black Breath when he is grievously wounded. All 3 would be healed by Aragorn in the Houses of Healing, fulfilling the prophecy, "When the Black Breath blows, and death's shadow grows, and all lights pass, come Ethelas, come Ethelas. Life to the dying, in the king's hand lying." The Nazgul, having been drawn into the unseen world by their rings of power, had poor vision in the material world, but they were keenly aware of beings who also existed in the unseen. This would include beings such as Gandalf and Glorfindel, but also mortals wearing the One Ring, meaning that when Frodo puts on the One Ring at Weathertop, it actually makes it much easier for the Nazgul to see him. Frodo, along with those existing in the unseen, could view the Nazgul as they appeared as men, the pale forms of the sorcerers and rulers they once were. As we know, the One Ring would be unmade, and the fortress of Barad-dûr would be destroyed as a result. Whether in the destruction of Barad-dûr or in the eruption of Mount Doom with their wearers, the 9 rings of power would be destroyed as well. While it doesn't mention this in The Lord of the Rings, the final chapter of the Silmarillion tells us, "The 1 and the 7 and the 9 are destroyed, and the 3 have passed away, and with them the Third Age is ended." Finally, we turn to the greatest of rings, the Ruling Ring, as we conclude this compilation with the One Ring. Around 1600 of the Second Age, Sauron has made his way back to Mordor. Traveling to the volcanic Mount Doom, the Dark Lord forges his master ring in the fires of the mountain. Sauron places his own will and power into his ring. As Sauron first wields his ring, Celebrimbor and the elven ring-bearers in Eregion were instantly aware of Sauron's treachery, and Sauron knew where they were. The elves quickly removed their rings. The 3, which had been made without Sauron's help, are sent to Gil-galad and Galadriel for safekeeping, while the remaining rings are kept in a vault in the city. Sauron builds up his armies and makes war upon the elves of Eriador in 1693. He destroys Eregion, kills Celebrimbor, and claims the 16 Rings of Power. though he would eventually be driven from Eriador, and the three would remain lost to him. Sauron distributes the 7 and the 9 among dwarves and men. The 7 help their dwarven bearers to amass great wealth, and the 9 men are given long lives and become great rulers, warriors, and sorcerers. During the Dark Years, when Sauron had conquered or devastated much of the lands of Middle-earth, he builds the great tower and fortress of Barad-dûr, not far from Mount Doom. In addition, he constructs the Black Gate in an effort to prevent invasion into his lands. Sauron also builds up his armies of orcs, trolls, and men. In this, we see 2 great abilities of the One Ring, likely serving the Dark Lord in his efforts. We know that like all rings of power, the one enhances the natural powers of its bearer. It is also said that a person bearing the One Ring could more easily dominate and command others. This no doubt proved useful to Sauron, who was already a master at manipulation in building his armies of men. We also see that much like the 3 Elven Rings, the One gives the power to slow the decays of the world. Like Galadriel keeping Lorien fair beyond belief, Sauron would tie the very construction of Barad-dûr itself to the One Ring. The One Ring also allows Sauron to control the 9 rings of the men, corrupting them, fading them into the unseen world, and transforming them into the Nazgûl, slaves under the domination of his master ring. While no doubt it was his intention to also enslave the 7 dwarf lords, their natural resistance against the domination of others saved them from this fate. Instead, their massive treasuries would attract the attention of the dragons, which would still work in Sauron's favor. With Sauron at his greatest might to date, he proclaims himself Lord of the Earth and King of Men, offending the arrogant Númenóreans, who themselves had been turning to darkness for centuries. In 3262 of the Second Age, their king, Ar-Pharazôn, lands a mighty fleet at Umbar and marches to confront the Dark Lord. Fearing the Númenóreans, Sauron's forces flee, and the Dark Lord takes a new tactic, surrendering to Ar-Pharazôn so he may corrupt Númenor from within. During his time in Númenor, Sauron becomes the chief counselor of the king and leads the realm to its destruction. With Sauron's body being destroyed in the downfall, it brings up a rather large question. Did Sauron have the One Ring during his time in Númenor? Tolkien seems to clear that up himself in letter 211. He naturally had the One Ring, and so very soon dominated the minds and wills of most of the Númenóreans. I do not think Ar-Pharazôn knew anything about the One Ring. The elves kept the matter of the rings very secret, as long as they could. In any case, Ar-Pharazôn was not in communication with them. Many who would assume Sauron did not have the ring point to Sauron's body being destroyed, as a reason he mustn't have had the ring with him. In the same letter, Tolkien addresses this as well. Though reduced to a spirit of hatred born on a dark wind, I do not think one need boggle at this spirit carrying off the One Ring, upon which his power of dominating minds now largely depended. With his body destroyed, Sauron makes his way back to Mordor, where he would regain his form and his power. Over the coming centuries, Sauron would attack the new realm of Gondor, founded by the surviving Númenóreans, for whom he held a deep hatred. When Isildur is driven from Minas Ithil, he flees to his father's kingdom of Arnor. There, Elendil and Gil-galad form the last alliance in order to take the fight to Sauron. These massive forces meet upon the field of battle, and after a 7-year siege of Barad-dûr, Sauron himself comes forth, driving the alliance back in 3441. There, upon the slopes of Mount Doom, Gil-galad and Elendil fight Sauron face to face. Both are killed by the Dark Lord, though Sauron himself would also be thrown down. Isildur approaches the fallen body of Sauron and cuts the One Ring from his finger, separating the Dark Lord from his greatest weapon. Sauron's spirit flees, and would go into hiding for 1,000 years. Isildur takes the One Ring in recompense for his fallen father and brother, declaring it an heirloom of his house, going against the advice of Elrond and Círdan that it should be destroyed in Orodruin. Gandalf would later read Isildur's account of claiming the One Ring. It was hot when I first took it, hot as a gleed, and my hand was scorched, so that I doubt if ever again I shall be free of the pain of it. Yet even as I write, it is cooled, and it seemeth to shrink, though it loseth neither its beauty nor its shape. Already the writing upon it, which at first was as clear as red flame, fadeth, and is now only barely to be read. It is fashioned in an elven script of Eregion, for they have no letters in Mordor for such subtle work. But the language is unknown to me. I deem it to be a tongue of the Black Land, since it is foul and uncouth. What evil it saith I do not know, but I trace here a copy of it, lest it fade beyond recall. The ring misseth, maybe, the heat of Sauron's hand, which was black and yet burned like fire, and so Gil-galad was destroyed. And maybe were the gold made hot again, the writing would be refreshed. With Sauron defeated, his dark tower of Barad-dûr would be leveled. However, having been created with the power of the One Ring, its foundations could not be destroyed so long as the ring remained. As Gondorians proceed to man the Black Gate in an attempt to guard against Sauron's return to Mordor, Isildur returns to Gondor to instruct his nephew on the ruling of the Southern Kingdom. In the second year of the Third Age, Isildur makes his way north toward Rivendell to reunite with his wife and youngest child, and to take his place as King of Arnor. As is his custom, he bears the One Ring around his neck, for it is implied that it has become physically painful for Isildur to wear the ring. The ring itself draws orcs to Isildur's location, mysteriously drawing the servants of the enemy toward itself. Isildur and his company are attacked in the disaster of the Gladden Fields. His men and his 3 eldest sons are killed in the ensuing battle, and Isildur, using the One Ring, is able to escape, jumping into the river in an attempt to swim to the other side. In the struggle across the mighty river, the One Ring intentionally slips off his finger. At first, Isildur feels an immense sense of loss, and may very well have drowned, as in his shock he stops struggling against the clinging weeds of the Anduin. But as quickly as it had come, the feeling passed. The pain had left him, and with an overwhelming feeling of a great burden being taken away, he pulls himself up out of the mud. However, his appearance alarms a group of orcs nearby, and they shoot him with arrows as they flee, and the ring's malice claims the life of its second bearer. While Saruman would later claim that during this time, the ring is washed out to sea, for over 2,000 years, the One Ring lies in the riverbed of the mighty Anduin. In 2463, 2 Stoor hobbits are at the river, one nosing about the banks, while the other is fishing. Deagol, the one fishing in his boat, is pulled in by a great fish, where he finds a shining object in the riverbed. There in his hand lay a beautiful golden ring, and it shone and glittered in the sun, so that his heart was glad. But Smeagol had been watching him from behind a tree, and as Deagol gloated over the ring, Smeagol came softly up behind. And he caught Deagol by the throat and strangled him, because the gold looked so bright and beautiful. Then he put the ring on his finger. No one ever found out what had become of Deagol. He was murdered far from home, and his body was cunningly hidden. But Smeagol returned alone, and he found that none of his family could see him when he was wearing the ring. However, he would soon be driven out by his family, and the ring drives him to settle deep in the Misty Mountains, not far from both a colony of orcs and also staying in the same part of the world as Sauron's re-emergence in Dol Guldur. And here we see the effects of the One Ring over centuries of possession, and our first clue of the natural resilience of hobbits. Unlike the men who would gradually be pulled into the Wraith world, Gollum would not suffer this same fate. despite possessing the ring for nearly 500 years. It would, however, change him greatly physically, as he endures far beyond the natural lifespan of any halfling. As Sauron grows stronger in Dol Guldur, his dark thoughts turn to the ring, and as if in answer to its master, the One Ring slips from Gollum's finger as he returns to his cave after hunting a goblin in 2941. The ring wishes to be discovered by a new bearer, likely intending to be captured by one of the nearby goblins, and more easily finding its way back to its master. Instead, it is picked up by Bilbo Baggins, who would use its power of invisibility many times throughout the rest of his quest with Thorin's company. Even with the ring in his possession for a relatively short time, Bilbo's first instinct is to keep it secret from both Gandalf and the dwarves. Though they would all soon be told of Bilbo's ring, Gandalf would assume it to be one of the lesser rings, rings created before the Rings of Power, which Gandalf calls mere essays in the craft. It is in 3001 of the Third Age, as Bilbo is celebrating his 111th birthday, that his relationship with the ring would reach its most critical juncture. He has seemingly not aged in the past 60 years, and is as obsessed with the ring as ever. His mind is often preoccupied with it, not wanting to keep it anywhere than on his person, frequently feeling a desire to use it, and at times feeling like an eye was watching him. Despite his hesitancy, Gandalf convinces his friend to leave the ring behind, and for the first time, the One Ring is willingly given up by its bearer. This was a crucial point. Whereas Bilbo is mostly able to go on with his life in Rivendell, Gollum had spent the previous years hunting for his precious, and the hobbit who took it. Gandalf, having grown suspicious of Bilbo's behavior toward the ring, travels to Minas Tirith, where he finds the scroll of Isildur and learns the details of the One Ring. Returning to Hobbiton 17 years after the long-expected party, Gandalf throws Frodo's ring into the fire, much to the chagrin of its owner. The heat reveals lines of fire in a flowing script, and while Gandalf would not speak its words at that time, we later learn that it reads, Ajnaj dur batuluk, Ajnaj kim batul, Ajnaj trakatuluk, Agbur zomishi, Kripatul. One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness, bind them. Not only was this confirmed to be the One Ring, but by this time Barad-dûr had been rebuilt in Mordor, and Sauron had already begun his war for the ring. Gandalf tells Frodo to make for Rivendell, where the wise could decide how best to proceed. It is also in this moment that we see Gandalf's fear of and great restraint regarding the One Ring. He knows that should he agree to take it himself, it would corrupt him entirely. As explained in my What If Gandalf Took the Ring video, and laid out in Tolkien's own letters, Gandalf is one of the few powerful enough to truly become master of Sauron's ring, and overthrow him with it. Fortunately, he leaves the task with Frodo, who over the coming weeks would succeed in getting it to Rivendell. On their journey, another being would briefly wear the One Ring. As the hobbits make their way through the Old Forest and come to the house of Tom Bombadil, Frodo lets him see the ring. The ring has no effect on the mysterious Bombadil. When he places it on his finger, he does not disappear, and Tom is not tempted by the power of the One in any way. Though Gandalf had warned him not to, Frodo would wear the ring multiple times on his journey. The most notable of the early occasions comes at Weathertop, where he is tempted by the ring so that he could evade the ring wraiths. However, we see here that what most perceive as invisibility, in fact, is the ring's ability to make that person appear in the unseen world. Since the wraiths themselves exist primarily in the unseen world, this has the opposite effect, and Frodo is even easier to see. As for the previously mentioned real-world invisibility, it should be noted that when men, as well as hobbits, wear the One Ring, they are not 100% indiscernible. One could see their faint and shaky shadow, but only in the full light of the sun. While not technically complete invisibility, it certainly was nearly complete. Frodo would of course come to Rivendell, where the Council of Elrond would debate what to do with Isildur's bane. After Boromir suggests giving the ring to Gondor, other ideas include giving it to Tom Bombadil or sending it across the sea to the Valar. However, in the end, it is determined that the ring cannot be used, hidden, or otherwise disposed of in any way. Their only feasible choice, though a long shot, is to take the One Ring to Mount Doom so that it may be truly destroyed. When it came to the decision of who would bear the burden, Bilbo offers to finish the job he had started. However, Gandalf tells him that not only are Bilbo's adventuring days done, but that he could not possibly take back the ring after having possessed it for so long. In the end, Frodo volunteers, and the Fellowship departs Rivendell on December 25th, 3018. The ring goes south, and after a failed attempt to pass Caradhras, the Fellowship passes through Moria, where Gandalf falls with the Balrog to the depths of the mountain. Led by Aragorn, they travel onward to Lorien, where Frodo would offer the One Ring to Galadriel. While tempted, she, like Gandalf, would pass on this offer, knowing that she would become both great and terrible. The following day, the ring departs Lorien, as the Fellowship makes their way down the Anduin River. After traveling for 9 days, they pass the Argonath and camp at Parth Galen. The Fellowship would break the following day, and Frodo puts on the One Ring after Boromir attempts to take it by force. Retreating to Amon Hen, the Hill of Sight, and still wearing the ring, Frodo sees signs of war wherever he looks. Finally, his gaze comes to the Dark Tower of Barad-dûr, where he feels the presence of the Eye. Not a giant flaming eyeball, but the unceasing vigilance of Sauron himself. And suddenly he felt the Eye. There was an eye in the Dark Tower that did not sleep. He knew that it had become aware of his gaze. A fierce, eager will was there. It leaped towards him. Almost like a finger, he felt it, searching for him. Very soon it would nail him down, know just exactly where he was. Amon Law it touched. It gazed upon Tol Brandir. He threw himself from the seat, crouching, covering his head with his gray hood. Frodo would hear a second, mysterious voice, striving against the Dark Lord and telling Frodo to take off the ring, which he does. Little does Frodo realize, but this voice is none other than a resurrected Gandalf, who lies upon Celebdin. As we know, Frodo would bear the ring over the coming weeks through the Emyn Muil, where they meet Gollum, and he swears himself to their service. In Gollum, Frodo sees what could become of himself, and feels a bond with the wretched creature. The trio goes to the Black Gate, before heading south through Ithilien. There they meet Boromir's brother, Faramir. After discovering the true purpose for the hobbits being in Gondorian territory, Faramir does what few have done before him. There, at the Forbidden Pool, he rejects the temptation of the One Ring. He sends the three on their way, as they make for the pass of Cirith Ungol, crossing into Mordor near the Witch King's city of Minas Morgul. As they climb to reach the pass, they witness the forces of Mordor marching to war. The rider halted suddenly, right before the entrance of the bridge, and behind him, all the host stood still. Maybe it was the ring that called to the Wraith Lord, and for a moment he was troubled, sensing some other power within his valley. Frodo felt the command that he should put on the ring, but great as the pressure was, he knew the ring would only betray him. He sighed and bent his head. At that moment, the Wraith King turned and spurred his horse and rode across the bridge, and all his dark host followed him. While obviously not knowing it was the One Ring itself, the Witch King ignores this mysterious power in his land and carries on with the task at hand, his master's siege upon Minas Tirith. Frodo and Sam are betrayed by Gollum, who has once again fallen to the temptation of his precious. After Frodo is bitten by Shelob and assumed dead, Samwise becomes the last new ring bearer of the One. He carries it for roughly 2 days as he works to free Frodo from the Tower of Cirith Ungol. As all who come across it, the One Ring tempts the humble gardener. As he stood there, even though the ring was not on him, but hanging by its chain about his neck, he felt himself enlarged, as if he were robed in a huge distorted shadow of himself, and vast, an ominous threat halted upon the walls of Mordor. Wild fantasies arose in his mind, and he saw Samwise the Strong, hero of the age, striding with a flaming sword across the darkened land, and armies flocking to his call as he marched to the overthrow of Barad-dûr. He had only to put on the ring and claim it for his own, and all this could be. Sam shakes off this temptation and resolves to save Frodo from the orcs, which he does, giving the ring back to Frodo. After their escape from Cirith Ungol, they make their way across the plains of Gorgoroth, finally arriving at Mount Doom. It is there upon the slopes that Frodo reaches a point where he can go no further of his own strength, and the ring has too strong a hold upon him to allow Sam to carry it for him. Thus, Samwise the Brave carries his master up the mountain. There they are attacked by Gollum, who is repelled by Frodo and shown mercy by Sam. Here we see an example of the apparent ability of the ring to grow stronger within the lands of its forging. For when Frodo and Sam are attacked by Gollum, Frodo grabs the ring, without even placing it on his finger, and appears as a figure robed in white, holding a wheel of fire. Similarly, as Sam was searching for Frodo in Cirith Ungol, he appeared to the orc as a powerful warrior cloaked in shadow, holding some nameless menace of power and doom. These are dramatic and powerful depictions of our humble hobbit heroes. It makes you realize how incredible it would have been to witness Sauron himself wielding the One Ring in his own lands. Finally, on the brink of the chasm at the very crack of Mount Doom, Frodo comes to the end. I have come, he said, but I do not choose now to do what I came to do. I will not do this deed. The ring is mine. And suddenly, as he set it on his finger, he vanished from Sam's sight. And far away, as Frodo put on the ring and claimed it for his own, even in the Samath Naur, the very heart of his realm, the power in Barad-dûr was shaken. The Dark Lord was suddenly aware of him. Sauron sends his ring wraiths in a last-ditch effort to reclaim the One Ring. But Gollum had leaped upon Frodo, biting off his finger and finally being reunited with his precious. In his celebration, Gollum slips and falls into the fires below. The One Ring, the source of so much death and suffering over 2 ages of the world, is destroyed. Barad-dûr, whose foundations were built with the power of the One, collapses. As for Sauron, he is finally defeated. While not entirely destroyed, he is permanently disembodied, unable to ever again take physical form or influence the people and events of the world. From Sauron, the peoples of Middle-earth are finally free. As always, I want to say a huge thank you to all my Patreon and YouTube supporters who make this channel possible. Tom DeBombadil19, Listen Me the Cinda, Rabbi Rob Thomas, Charles Leisure, CCDC Red Team, Joe Tepper, The Mighty Mim, Andrew Carlisle, Swirled Traveler, Matthew Jeffrey, Viking Lord, Alvin Einbert, Jeremy Daniel Derby, Madame Director, Leo Vittori, Sky Carcass, Slide Belts, Dane Ragnarsson, Berto Berg, Graham Derricott, The Dark-Haired One, Wyland, Micah Wu, and Debbie. If you enjoyed the artwork in this video, check out the artists in the description to purchase prints of their great work for yourself. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Nerd of the Rings. It It is one of the greatest and longest-lasting realms of men in all Middle-earth. Rising from the ashes of Numenor, it would survive war, plague, and turmoil for over 3,000 years before finally seeing the return of the king. Today on Nerd of the Rings, we covered the history of Gondor. After the downfall of Numenor, the 5 ships of Isildur and Anarion were brought to the southern lands of Middle-earth, while their father Elendil and his 4 ships were taken north. In 3320 of the Second Age, the brothers continue their voyage up the Anduin River, landing in the heart of the new realm they would build, Gondor. While known as a great kingdom in later days, Gondor was initially subservient to Elendil's northern kingdom of Arnor. Isildur and Anarion rule as kings of Gondor, while Elendil rules over both realms as the High King. Isildur settles in and rules over the lands of Ithilien. He builds the Tower of Minas Ithil on the border of Gondor and Mordor as a direct threat to Sauron. Minas Ithil, meaning Tower of the Moon, is where Isildur plants the sapling of the White Tree of Nimloth, which he had saved from Numenor. Meanwhile, Anarion builds the city of Minas Anor, the Tower of the Sun, directly to the west across the river. Between their 2 cities, the brothers established the first capital of their realm, Osgiliath. The capital city is known for its beauty and has great stone bridges going over the river Anduin. Aside from the great craftsmanship shown in the construction of these 3 cities, the early Gondorians were also responsible for some of the most impressive monuments and buildings in all Middle-earth. The Second Age Gondorians constructed the Tower of Orthanc, made of unbreakable black stone. Another great black stone is one Isildur brings from Numenor, the Stone of Erech, upon which the King of the Mountains swears an oath that he will one day break. Gondor also builds a fortress within its realm of Kalinardon at Aglarond, also known as the Glittering Caves, with other wonders to follow in their later history. Among these great cities and fortresses are spread 4 of the 7 Palantiri, rescued from the fall of Numenor. Isildur and Anarion place 1 in each of their cities of Minas Anor and Minas Ithil. They place 1 in the capital of Osgiliath, and 1 is stationed in the Tower of Orthanc at the northern border of their realm. Among the citizens of this newly formed kingdom are men of Numenor who already lived in Middle-earth. These people, many of whom were among the faithful and at least partially of Numenorian descent, lived in long-held Numenorian colonies like Belfalas and Pelargir. The nobles of Belfalas were given a hereditary princedom, from which we would eventually get Imrahil, the prince of Dol Amroth. Despite its role as the lesser kingdom, Gondor is, from the very beginning, more powerful and populous than the northern Arnor. Though soon enough, Gondor would have to look north for aid. Shortly after the cities of Minas Anor, Osgiliath, and Minas Ithil are finished, the fires of Orodruin awaken, signaling the return of Sauron. Being survivors of Numenor, the Gondorians were aware of Sauron from his time on the Island Kingdom, though this was their first proof that he had survived the destruction. From this moment onward, the men of Gondor refer to Orodruin as Amon Amarth, or Mount Doom. In 3429, Sauron begins his quest for vengeance upon the men of Numenor. He launches an attack upon Minas Ithil, forcing Isildur to retreat along with his family and a seedling of the White Tree of Gondor. He sails down the Anduin and out to sea, before going to his father in Arnor. Meanwhile, Anarion is left to hold out against Sauron, protecting Minas Anor and Osgiliath for the next 5 years. He would in fact succeed in driving Sauron's forces back to the Efel Duath, but as their enemy gathers reinforcements, they know they cannot hold the line indefinitely. Finally, in 3434 of the Second Age, Isildur would return, alongside his father, Elrond Half-Elven, and the High King of the Noldor, Gil-galad. in the
We shall
last
do as you
alliance of
command.
elves and men.
Your presence
Anarion
is
would
strong.
join this host at the northwest corner of Mordor,
That path
where
is
they fight
perilous.
Sauron's forces
Our
in the Battle
confidence
of
wavers.
Daggerlad. While the death toll is
Our
great,
vengeance
especially
is
among
yours.
the Sylvan elves,
We'll
the alliance
consider
is
it.
victorious and presses on to Sauron's own
Production of
fortress.
the item
For the
is
next 7
complete.
years, the alliance lays siege to Barad-dûr.
colonizable
In
planet
the
has
6th
been
year of the
discovered.
siege, Anarion is struck by a rock thrown from the tower and killed. Finally, in 3441,
Your presence
Sauron
is
himself
strong.
comes forth from Barad-dûr. So
Our
great was his
vengeance
attack
is
that he
yours.
pushes the alliance back to the slopes of Mount Doom. But there, Sauron comes face to
Logistics
face
upgrade
with the High
complete.
Kings of elves
Our
and
time
men,
has come.
Gil-galad and Elendil. The three fight in legendary combat until all three are thrown down. In this moment, Isildur takes the hilt shard of his father's sword and cuts the One Ring from Sauron's hand. No longer able to hold his physical form, Sauron's spirit flees, and the Alliance is victorious. Isildur returns to Gondor after the leveling of Barad-dûr and the destruction of Sauron's
await the
forces.
Unity's
With his
command.
father and brother both slain in the war, he is now in line to
obey
become the
the
new
Unity's
High
will.
King. At the border of Anorion and Calenarthon, Isildur constructs a secret tomb for Elendil upon Amon Anwar. He would also plant the seedling of the White Tree in Minas
Civilian
Anor
structure
in
complete.
memory of his brother. And after 2 years of preparing his nephew Menelil
presence is
for rule,
strong.
he leaves Gondor in the hands of its third
We'll
king.
consider it.
Isildur departs
Unleash
Gondor
our
in the
wrath.
second year of the Third Age,
Retribution is
intending to take up
ours.
the High Kingship
You may
of both
seek.
Gondor and Arnor
You
in
will find
Annuminas.
enlightenment in death.
Instead, he would
Our
die after an
cleansing
ambush by
fire.
orcs, and the One
The
Ring
shields are
is lost
offline.
to the Anduin. Despite the loss of Isildur, both
The
Gondor
enemy
and
will know
Arnor would
our
grow in
wrath.
wealth and power for the
forces
next
have engaged
800
the enemy.
years. Gondor's
cannot
growth would
survive
only
without
briefly
armor.
be interrupted by
The
an
shields are
Easterling
offline.
invasion in 492 of the Third Age. And while Arnor would eventually begin
Submit
its
to
steady
the
decline
Unity
into
or be
ruin,
eradicated.
Gondor would continue marching
shields
to
are offline.
prosperity. From
Defense
830 to
upgrade
1149, Gondor experiences its golden age, a period of rule by 4 consecutive rulers, collectively known as the Ship Kings. These kings, Taranon Falastur, Eärnil I, Kiriandil,
is trapped
and
after arriving at a
Kirjaher,
phase
would
jump
seek to
inhibitor.
expand Gondor's might in both military and navy.
Production of the
Taranon,
item is
the first of
complete.
these kings, extends Gondor's realm both west and south of the mouths of Anduin. Taranon is
Revenge
also known
awaits.
as the husband of Queen
shall do as you
Baruthia, a
command.
black Numenorian known for being nefarious, solitary, and loveless, and of course, for her spy cats, all of which is covered in my Black Numenorians video. Taranon is the first king
The
of
Unity
Gondor
calls
to
us
die
to
without an
action.
heir to his throne, and having years earlier cast his wife out to sea adrift aboard a ship, the crown passes to his nephew, Eärnil I. Eärnil continues the expansion of his uncle by constructing a great navy and repairing the old Numenorian port of Pelargir.
minds to
Despite
make
the
our
greatness
own.
Gondor had achieved, it was not yet the
Military
supreme
structure
power of
complete.
the coasts of Middle-earth, for there was still the haven of Umbar, also a former Numenorian port, but
We
under
have
the
cleansed
control
the
of
planet of
Black
heathens.
Numenorians and
Let the
Haradrim.
bidding
In
commence.
933 of the Third
Another
Age,
planet
20
joins
years
the
into his
Unity.
kingship,
The
Eärnil
fleet embraces
attacks the
new
forces
vessels.
of Umbar,
Our
seizing
fleet is
control of
trapped
the
after
harbor,
arriving at a
and as a
phase jump
result,
inhibitor.
the seas of
Revenge
Middle-earth.
awaits.
Still, the sea itself was not tamed. For just 3 years later, Eärnil is lost at sea and never seen again. His son, Kiriandil, rises to the kingship. This third ship king continues the practice of building ever more ships, though he would die 79 years later in Umbar when the Haradrim, led by the lords exiled by his father, lay siege to the city. Kiriaher then becomes the fourth and final ship king. He seeks vengeance for his
Defense
father's
upgrade
death, and after
complete.
building up his armies, he attacks Harad by both land and sea in a decisive victory in 1050. He forces the defeated kings of Harad to acknowledge the overlordship of Gondor and dubs himself
We await the
Hayarmendisil,
Unity's command.
meaning South Victor. At this moment, Gondor is at the very height of its power. both militarily and in terms of lands occupied. Their lands stretched from Celebrant in the north to Harnan and Umbar in the south, from the Grey Flood in the west to the Sea of Rune in the east. The realm was now spread far and wide, but it would not last, for lesser kings, plague, and civil war were on the horizon. With Hyar Mendesil's death in 1149, his son Atanatar takes the throne as the 16th king of Gondor. During his 77-year reign, the strength and wealth of Gondor would begin to deteriorate. The 19th king was Romendesil II, who would take the crown in 1304. And while there had been 2 kings between these rulers, Romendesil was effectively the ruler during nearly the entire reigns of his father and uncle before him, after winning great renown in battle. During the rule of his uncle, the Easterlings resumed their attacks on Gondor, and during his battles, Romendesil discovers that not all the Northmen adhered to Gondor. Seeking to secure the region, he leads a great force from Gondor to attack the Easterling army, occupying the lands between Rovanion and the Sea of Rune in 1248. His attack is a success, completely defeating the Easterlings west of the sea. It is then that he begins going by the name Romendesil, meaning East Victor. In that very year, Romendesil fortifies the western shore of the Anduin north through the lands of Calenarthon. It is at his behest that the Argonath, the great pillars of the kings Anarion and Isildur, are constructed north of Amon Hen. It's possible that the Seat of Seeing and the Seat of Hearing were also built during this time, given their proximity and Romendesil's interest in the north. He also took a special interest in the Northmen, many of whom he brought into his service. Romendesil even goes so far as to send his son to live among the Northmen, though this seemingly small act would bring civil war to Gondor. Prince Valakar would marry a woman of the Northmen and have a son named Eldakar. Valakar would rule for 66 years after his father's death, but when he dies in 1432, Eldakar takes the throne to the anger of many. For many Gondorians of Númenórean blood disapproved of Eldakar's mixed heritage and believed a half-breed had no right to rule. Chief among these was his second cousin, Castamir. Castamir was Gondor's captain of ships, and thus was supported by both Umbar and Pelargir, among other coastal regions of the realm. In 1437, 5 years into his cousin's rule, Castamir leads a rebellion and besieges the city of Osgiliath. During this attack, Osgiliath is covered in flames, and the Dome of Stars, a great hall in the capital, is destroyed, and its palantir is lost in the Anduin. In his sack of Osgiliath, Castamir first shows his utter cruelty and executes Eldakar's son, Ornendil. Thus begins the kin strife in Gondor, a topic that can and will get its own video in the future. But for now, we'll touch on some of the biggest key points. Eldakar goes into exile, fleeing to his mother.
Bait him in to the stack, left side. Oh, I almost got 3. Caught his jump. Got him. Target down. Noob down.
This is gonna hurt.
This is real firepower.
This is gonna hurt.
Holy, that slow is evil. Guys, how do they have 5 ults? Oh yeah, I forgot. We have a human torch.
Time for some fireworks.
I should put this in. I think he's going to get flanked in here later. So I'm actually going to keep this here. I'm watching, and we're watching Strange. Watching Strange.
Head for you, Torch.
We're better when we work.
I'm in back. You can walk on back.
Damn, I didn't see it. Got him. He still has strange ult. Fuck it, let's just stall.
Go back with the
Powering up. No coming back from that. I am ready to put on a show.
You wasted that.
This is gonna hurt.
I put up a trap here.
You know what to do.
New nest bottom left. Big coverage, big coverage. Where they're backing, reset nest forward position. Assuming
Yeah, no, it's okay.
forward position activated.
Fireworks.
Enemy team currently looking like they might be crying themselves to sleep this game. Looking mighty fine out here, guys. Mighty fine.
Sis, we're in bad shape.
What are you doing?
Fighters get the job done.
There's actually 1 HP. I'm kind of sad. Alright, so he has strange ult, right? We just gotta watch him now. Or we'll just die. That works too. Backing up, backing up. Post ult. We know he's gonna hunt us. We're gonna put a nest here really fast. We know he's gonna be doing flight into Giga mode, right? Bait it, bait it. Calculated, dumbass.
You're crazy. You go. We got
This is gonna hurt.
crazy.
Bait it, bait it. Calculated, dumbass.
You're crazy. You go. We got
This is gonna hurt.
Bait him in to the stack, left side.
focus on.
I needed that.
Oh, I almost got 3.
This is gonna hurt.
Fuck it, I'm ulting. Connection located. Run for your life! Wait for the ult to disappear.
Mine's in.
3 stack behind, 3 stack behind. Got one. Luna down. Miss stun on strange. Miss -1 kill, -1 kill. Too scared, you might get hooked.
This is gonna hurt.
Beta Renode. Come on back, come on back.
Fighters get the job. Enemy in our
Move change off the map.
Oh, strange off map. Calculated. Oh,
Okay, take
Mine's
our.
in place.
alright, looking good here.
Enemy in our sight. Systems restoring.
You can with my own.
This is crazy, right? The fact he can do this. Hello. What are we ulting?
Yeah, hold.
Enemy in our sight.
Hammer down again.
Time for some fireworks.
Is it TP behind us?
I needed that.
Sun strange, dead.
Can we take heart? Take
Nest behind. Chase down Luna. Not having fun here, actually.
This is gonna hurt.
Ult for HP. Get frozen, die anyway. Or do I die? Wait a second. Ult's gonna come in, he's gonna be mad, he's gonna ult by a nest, pretty sure. Strange might have ult, gonna have to look at Strange real quick. If I stun him, he dies there next time. He's gonna kill my ult, that's fine. Got one. He's still mad. Look at him, dude. He's heckin' peeved. 2 mind kills! It's at the Strange ult! Ult on the body. Punishes off the map.
You nice.
Who is this guy, guys? The body. Punishes off the map.
You nice.
Who is this guy, guys? Guys, what's going on, guys? Guys, hello? Why aren't they just looking down, boys? Why don't they just look at the ground? Avoid the nest mines. What's going on here? Wait for the support to back up soon. We cannot die. We cannot die. It's the only thing that matters.
So much better.
Boom!
I'm counting on you, friends.
Look at change.
You delivered the mix. I've got yours.
Trying to push.
Oh, I'll take
Forward nest spotted. They're gonna go wide, I assume.
Time for some fire.
Train is weak. Hulk face check top. Who's top? Who's top? Gamer down! Bait support ult here.
This is gonna hurt.
Don't know.
Put on a
Blind mine behind.
hurry up.
Another two here.
Here, here.
Counting on you, friend.
Chase Luna post. Luna.
Look at Hulk. Hulk is half.
This guy just hit it.